Good afternoon. I've been hard at work all day. Started out early this morning working. I'll be here all day working, and I'll be here tonight working in the job I'm paid to do on behalf of the people of the great state of Wisconsin. Just like the some 300,000 state and local workers who work hard each and every day, who showed up hard to work today in their jobs, I continue to work, and I'm calling on the members of the state Senate to show up and do the job that they're paid to do as well. They don't have to agree with everything we propose, but they should, on behalf of the people who pay their salaries, show up to work. And so right off the bat, I want to make a plea, as I have throughout this afternoon, that all the members of the state Senate, including the Democrats who are currently in the minority, take it upon themselves to fulfill the duties that they were elected to do, and that is to vote on behalf of the constituents in their respective districts. As I mentioned repeatedly over the last couple of days, certainly the thousands of people here and outside the Capitol have every right to be heard. But I want to make sure that not for one moment are their voices drowning out the voices of the millions of taxpayers all across the state of Wisconsin, who, as I've toured the state over the last couple of days and even before that, have made it clear that they think while what we're doing is a politically bold move, it is a modest request of our employees at the state and local level. It's modest in the sense that what we're asking for is very similar, in many cases much better than what the average taxpayer is getting all across the state of Wisconsin. We're asking for a 5.8% contribution to the pension system, which is essentially right at the national average for those who have pensions, and many of our workers in the state, particularly those in the middle class, do not. And when it comes to the health care premium contribution, we're asking for just over 12.5%, which is half the national average. Half the national average. The workers I was at the other day at manufacturing companies all across the state point out that they'd love to have a deal like what we're proposing. Doing this helps us avoid layoffs. The last thing we need in the public or the private sector in this state is more layoffs at a time when we face an economic and budgetary crisis. So for us, allowing these modest requests of our employees to move forward as part of the legislative process will allow us to avoid, in the coming biennial budget, 5,500 layoffs of state government employees and anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 local government employees. I think in totality to avoid 10,000 to 12,000 state workers and local government workers from being laid off at a time when I don't want anybody in the state laid off is not an unreasonable request. Now, the interesting thing is back in the 1990s, I had the honor of serving in this Capitol as a member of the state legislature, and I remember back then, former Governor Tommy Thompson stood up and took at the time what was considered to be a brave move. He put into place the QEO, the Qualified Economic Offer, which put a cap on wages and benefits for teachers at that time. It was one of the key elements in the 90s. It was able to bring sustainable property tax relief for about a decade and a half before the former governor, my predecessor, repealed that in his last budget. At the time, he got a lot of passion from people who were affected by that QEO, but in the end, we saw it was in the best interest of the taxpayers of the state of Wisconsin. We're at a similar moment in our history. We have a $3.6 billion deficit that we've inherited. Like nearly every other state across the country, we're broke in Wisconsin. We don't have more money to give. We don't have anything to negotiate with. It's either a matter of making reductions and making modest requests of our government employees, or looking at massive layoffs at a time when we don't need anybody else laid off. Now, in contrast, other states, New York, California as examples, are cutting billions of dollars from local government, from schools, from their university systems, without giving them the sort of tools they need to balance those budgets without cutting back on core services or laying off thousands upon thousands of government employees. In contrast, what we offer today is a very reasonable alternative to what they're doing in other states all across the country. It's still getting our budget balanced, putting it in order without passing on massive tax increases that would cripple the state's economy, but doing it in a way that ultimately diminishes the possibility of layoffs and make sure that our schools and our core services continue to get the kind of support that they need in the classroom and on the streets. Finally, before I open up and take some questions, I just want to tell you that, again, I think these are bold political moves we're talking about here today, but they are modest requests. And I believe the majority of people in this state, the 5.5 million people that I am honored to serve, those taxpayers understand that, and we're starting to see that trend today. We had over 8,000 emails And while in the last couple of days we've heard a lot from government workers who are protesting a very modest change in terms of the pension and health care contribution, the more than 8,000 emails we got today, the majority are telling us to stay firm, to stay strong, to stand with the taxpayers. And while, again, the protesters have every right to be heard, I'm going to make sure that the taxpayers in the state are heard and their voices are not drowned out by those circling the Capitol. With that, I'll take some questions. We got
Governor, if the senators do not make themselves available by tomorrow, would you be willing to personally have dialogue with them, maybe also in concert with the Senate Republicans?
Again, I'll talk to senators, but I'm going to tell them first and foremost, if I get a chance to talk to them, they get paid to come to work, and they should be coming to work. You can't have conversations if you're not at work. And they have every right to propose amendments, to have dialogue, to debate the bill, but they don't get to do any of those things unless they show up for work. The people of this state pay us as elected officials to do our job, to represent them. And the most fundamental job, having served in the legislature for nearly 9 years, more than anything else, we're responsible for voting on behalf of our constituents. You can't do that if you're hiding out in some other state.
When you say you're willing to talk to senators, are you willing to concede on any points in the bill?
Not anything that's going to cost the state or local governments the ability to balance their budget. What we're talking about here is ultimately about balancing our budget. Nothing more, nothing less. If we don't have the power at the state and local level to balance our budget, then we have the alternatives, which none of those are acceptable. More layoffs at the state level, more layoffs at the local level, prohibiting local governments from being able to control their own destiny is an unacceptable proposition to me.
Couldn't you reach a compromise if you take the concessions, which people seem to be less worried about than the changes to the union rights? If you take the concessions but restore collective bargaining, wouldn't that be a way to get the...
No, as an elected official at the local level for more than 8 years, I can tell you can't pass a budget on a hope and a prayer that every school district, county board, town board, city council is somehow magically going to reach the same conclusion when it comes to concessions. We've got districts all across the state. We can't afford to have the prospect of the kind of reduction in state aid that we've seen in other states without giving those local governments the tools that they need, frankly, the tools they've been asking for decades, which is exactly what we're giving local government officials. We're giving them the tools to offset major layoffs and program reductions in those areas. The other thing for the state level is, on average in the past decade, the average length of time for a negotiated settlement of a contract has taken 15 months. We don't have 15 months to balance the budget. We've got to balance it now. And for those unions that say they want to negotiate, I think it's pretty disingenuous. In December, they tried to ram through a bill after the election, when they were hoping that people weren't paying attention. Ran it through after the election in December, but before I came to office and before the new majorities came in, they had no interest in negotiating with us then. I think it's a red herring right now in hopes that somehow that would weaken the resolve of people to move forward and respond to the taxpayers. In the end, we have a budget to balance. It's better to balance it, giving the tools to state and local government to balance it without forcing massive layoffs.